an introduction. But Nichole has come along to talk to us a little bit about why she upcycles, how she lends, how she incorporates that in her creative design. So over to you.
Thank you very much for having me. Welcome to the Mending Meetup. It's so nice to see so many of you actually caring that much about your garments and mending and sewing. Could everyone just kind of gather, just bring your chairs forward?
Feel a bit far away.
Let's get into it here.
Amazing.
All friends.
Sorry.
So can I see by show of hands, just so I know who's here? How many of you sew regularly? How many of you sewists? Okay, nearly everybody. How many of you mend regularly? How many of you need incentive like meetups to come and mend? And how many of you regularly alter your clothes?
Yeah.
Very good, very good. Okay, so hello, I'm Nichole. I am probably best known for having been on the Sewing Bee, but more recently, I think my work on Instagram has really been around my whole transition from doing what most sewists traditionally do. Most home sewists, we start off, we get inspiration from our fabrics, we go buy our patterns, we make our garments, we show them off. We feel really good, and then we repeat the cycle, and we end up building these wardrobes of me-made items which we can look at with pride and love, and which often we kind of end up on this treadmill of moving on to the next project, and not necessarily caring, maintaining, thinking about the longevity of the things we've made, or going back to them to transform them into something else if we stop wearing them, or repurposing them, or so on. And I'm completely guilty of that as a sewist. If you saw me about 2 or 3 years ago, I then went on this kind of journey, and it wasn't where, I know some people look at me and they think, oh, you know, you're in the sustainable space and all this, and I never really planned that. I think as I just began to raise my consciousness in general around living a life that feels a bit more wholesome, a bit more in line with my values, and wanting to not be the kind of over-consumerist that I once was. I'll put my hand up. In my 20s, I was a very voracious fast fashion shopper. I've always loved clothes ever since I was young. And I think sewing for me, once I reconnected with it, I learned to sew when I was a teenager. I taught myself on my mum's sewing machine. She always gets the credit for teaching me to sew, but she never did. She showed me how to turn it on, how to operate it.
Facilitated, right?
Beyond that, I don't think anyone has ever, none of our siblings have ever seen my mom even use that sewing machine. So I kind of taught myself, and I think it's one of those things where I guess, as many of you will probably relate to, I think once you get drawn to a skill or drawn to something creative, and it feels like you just gel with it, and you get persistent with it, and you want to get better at it. Because I always say to people, like, you know, some people are like, oh, I'd love to learn how to sew, and I'm like, that's great, try it, but it is not for everyone. So never feel disheartened if you tried and you feel like, well, I don't quite get on with it, because it takes a lot of patience, right? We all know this. It takes a lot of patience. We make a lot of mistakes. And just to give you some context for where I came from with the whole sewing thing. When I grew up in Trinidad, at 14, 15, wherever I learned how to sew, ready-made fashion there was very expensive because clothes had to be imported, and there were very high import duties. So ready-made clothes were very expensive. So I always associated ready-made clothes with being rich. Mm-hmm. Whereas everybody else had a seamstress, including my mom. We'd go to after school to the seamstress every 2 or 3 months, and I said, what do you want? Buy your fabric, and she'd make it up. 2 weeks later, you go back and pick up your stuff. So for me, that was kind of like the average man thing, right? The average person thing to do. So when I started sewing, and I remember sewing, one of the worst things, well, not first things actually, when I began to learn how to use sewing patterns, I made myself a shirt, a collared shirt, buttons, everything. And I wore it out one time, and I remember telling somebody I'd made it, but with a bit of embarrassment, because it was like, don't look at me, because it didn't feel as good as something you might buy, right? So fast forward to now, and I think when I moved to London at age 22, I probably didn't get a sewing machine until about 5 years into being in London, and at that point it's because I had a corporate job, I was working in an office, and I didn't really have a creative outlet like I had all along that time before. And I decided to buy myself a sewing machine, and I thought, I'm going to start sewing again. And again, the first few things I made on the machine, there were a few little summer dresses and things, but I always felt really self-conscious wearing them because I never felt like they were as good as buying something in the shop. Then, as I began to, actually, I was still very sporadic with my sewing until I had this kind of major career leading to a bit of an existential crisis. So after I left corporate life, I decided to work for myself because that was always my ambition, was to be my own boss. That's always what I wanted for myself. And when I went to maternity leave with my first son, I broke away from my last corporate job. They didn't know that at the time. I was on my nice maternity package. I'm coming back in 6 months. And absolutely no intention of going back. But as fortune would have it, it was a startup company and the credit crunch had happened in 2008. It was a stock market based investment product that the company was launching, and basically they just knew they weren't going to survive the recession because they were just too soon into their launch. And so I got a call from my boss 3 months into my maternity leave saying, we're winding up the company, but here's a severance check. Okay. So this is now my sign, this is now manna from heaven, like I've got to do this thing now. So then I started a jewelry line because I was doing jewelry as a hobby. I'd learned how to make jewelry about 2 years before. And again, as when you pick up sewing or any other creative hobby and you start to really, it does something to your soul, I think, when you're here with a creative purpose, like you're here to fulfill that creativity. I feel like I could have gone down any particular outlet. At one point I thought I might be a furniture designer, but then when I got into jewelry, it just became this outlet that really fed me inside. And so I was doing jewelry as a hobby for a couple of years, and then when I decided, okay, I want to work for myself and start my business and do something. Funny enough, it wasn't my first business idea. However, I landed on that because I always believe you start where you are, right? Because I think when we want to start a new venture, we always think, oh my God, I need to have a website, I need to have premises, I need to have, a photographer doing this, I need to have all these things in place before I can launch something. And it's not true. I started from my dining table making, I look back now and I think, my God, I would go out to shows. So at one point during my career, I was showing at London Fashion Week. That's a story for another day, how I got in there. And at one point I had a collection. You can imagine what Fashion Week is like. You have all these completely professional designers that have been doing it for years. They turn up with these polished collections. I had a table about this big with 8 pieces on it. And I still sold it to ASOS, I still sold it to the Vinny, so it is possible to do all these things with the resources you have, right? But then after years of being in that fashion grinder, it was very intense on time. You're putting out seasonal collections, you're doing a whole round of shows, fashion weeks, I was doing London, Paris, sometimes New York, Milan. And it was very expensive, right? And also very taxing. And at that point, I was on baby number 3. Demands of family, demands of work were just getting really out of balance. And I was just burnt out. I was completely burnt out. The whole reason I went into that whole line of work was because I loved the creativity. I loved designing the collections, bringing the jewelry to life, seeing the samples, and ultimately wearing them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it got to a point where when I looked at my work life, probably about 5% of it was spent actually in that creative space. The rest of it was dealing with suppliers, dealing with customers, producing orders, sending them out, dealing with issues. And it was just too much. And actually, I wasn't really even making that much money from it. The company, even into its second year, was turning over 6 figures in sales, but I was just barely even taking a paycheck. Mm-hmm. And so after about 7 years of this, I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's just not sustainable. I will literally drive myself into the ground, financially as much as everything else. So I just stopped. And it's funny when you do something like that, because you then end up in this very odd space of, for 7 years I had this identity. People ask me, oh, what do you do? Well, I'm a jewelry designer, blah, 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 blah. Even today somebody said, oh, so what do you do? I'm like, don't ask me, I don't know. I just do what I do. When you peel those labels away, you really quickly realize how much you don't know yourself, and you don't know what to call yourself, and you don't know how to explain yourself to people. Not that you have to, but when you're meeting someone for the first time, it's like, naturally you get curious and you want to know what they do and blah, blah. And people want something to hang their hat on, right? When you kind of go, well, You ever had this experience where and they find it really hard to explain what they do, and you're just a bit like, so what? You know, so there was this period of 2 years where I was in this really existentially crisis period of, I don't actually know who I am, what I want to do. I'm not actually working actively at the moment. I don't know what to do now, what to do with myself. And that's when I reconnected with sewing, because there was something in me that knew the only way out of this cave is to be doing something creative, something with my hands where I'm making and I'm creating. And this time I told myself, I'm not going to put any expectations, any pressure, because of course when you design for a living, you get into this headspace of, when I make something, I'm like, okay, so who's going to want it? Who's going to sell it? You know, who's going to buy it? What price is it going to be? Can I make it again if somebody wants it? You know, and I had to let go of all that stuff and just say, this is really just me sewing for me, because otherwise I don't even know what I'll do with myself. And that's where I really was for 2 years, and I wasn't sharing my work anywhere. I was making all these clothes, I wasn't sharing them on Instagram, I wasn't, apart from when I was out in the world wearing stuff, and I would always get stopped by women. So that famous tiger top that I wore on the show, right? I would always get stopped by women about it. And so I kind of thought, well, I know I've got something here, but you know when you just don't even know how to harness it, what to turn it into. At one point I thought, well, maybe I can have a fashion line, and then I was like, no, you've been down that road before with the jewellery, you didn't like it. And it's even worse now with clothing, because you now have sizing issues, and you now have even everything that burnt you out about the jewelry, you now have that times 10. So I knew that wasn't the route. But it was around that, you know, after about 2 years of kind of just like really feeling quite, I was getting to a place with the sewing where I was really creatively fulfilled, but I realized that I wasn't sharing it with anyone. And that's when I decided to apply for the sewing bee, because that for me, that year I label as my year of daring greatly. It was inspired by a book by Brene Brown called Daring Greatly. And it is about the power of vulnerability, it's about the power of allowing yourself to be seen. That, especially as creatives, I think, we tend to look in the shadows a little bit, because we don't want to be judged for our work, or, you know, because it's so close to our hearts. The minute we put it out there, we put ourselves in the firing line, we feel a bit like, oh my God, if someone says something bad, I'm not going to be able to handle it. And so this book really inspired me, because I kind of thought, well, what's the point of doing all this work if I'm not showing it, if I'm not sharing it? No one's actually benefiting from this but me. And so I decided to apply for the show, because this was me getting back out into the world. This was me allowing myself to be seen again after 2 years of literally hiding. Like literally hiding.
How old were you?
I was 40? Yeah, 41.
And the kids?
So the eldest would have been about 10 or 11, and the youngest would be about 5. Yeah. So a little bit more grown up by then. But it was, so that was my whole thing about applying for the sewing bee. So I got into the sewing bee, and that really kickstarted now a whole other avenue of not just sewing in a professional capacity, but also learning more about myself in this whole space, right? So when I came out of the sewing bee, like most of my fellow bees, you come out, you have your little following on Instagram, you do the whole like, oh my God, look how many this, and you know, my following had basically plateaued for a couple of years after the sewing bee, as you know, expected, right? I mean, you get a following after the show, and then everyone just, the same people who follow you from the show just keep on following you, and it's really difficult to get discovered after that, for various reasons, I think. And what I worked out was, I don't think anyone's actually getting much value from what I'm sharing here, apart from, oh, look at that nice thing I made. It's like, well, yeah, good for you. What's in it for me? Yeah. You know, and whereas like with other sewers, because there were some sewers I follow because I would get pattern inspiration, for example. They'd make something and be like, oh, I didn't know that pattern existed. That's a really good pattern. And I'll make a note of it, or fabric, or whatever. But I wasn't doing any of those things because I was sourcing really obscure fabrics from around the world. I was self-drafting my own patterns. So it's not even like people can go, oh my God, where's that from? Like, you can't make it. And so I kind of went on this journey of not consciously pivoting, but I think, you know, that there's a thing about intentions, right? If there's one thing you walk away with from today, it's about the power of setting visions and intentions, right? What I mean by that is, there are things that there are things that I consciously think, okay, it would be nice to venture into this space or to do this or that. But unless you put out there, even in your own mind, what it is you want to get out of your life, your craft, whatever it is, your career, anything, it started putting it out there. It started putting the intention out there into the atmosphere, the universe, whatever you want to call it, because it doesn't always happen overnight. But what I'm about to tell you in the next steps that's happened to me after that is all, for me, looking back. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, he famously said, you can only connect the dots looking back. So I look back now at the connection of dots that led me to standing here and talking to you about the dots, is a series of what kind of feels like almost very fortuitous turns of events, right? So around the time when I was thinking it's all well and good the way I was sewing and everything, but you get to the point where you just think okay, so do I just do this indefinitely? Do I just, buy my fabric, buy my pattern, make something? I felt like something in me wanted a bit more of a challenge, or a bit more of something to just make me feel excited again. Around that time, so two things happened. Around that time, my daughter, who's now 12, she probably would have been about 11 or 10 at the time, late primary school. So she and her friends were getting into the whole charity shopping and everything like that, which is great if there's anything that I feel happy about, or in the next generation, is that the whole culture of thrift shopping and secondhand shopping, charity shopping with youngsters there's no stigma around it anymore for them. It's just second nature for them now. So my daughter said to me one time, she's like, oh, can you take me charity shopping? And I was like, I've been to charity shops in the past, but not in a way that was a thing, And so I was like, really? And she's like, yeah. So I took her to our local area Crystal Palace, and there are 4 charity shops there. And I was like, oh my God.
Resources.
Oh my God. There's actually some quite nice stuff in here. Not high-end design stuff, but stuff you just this is a nice jumper, this is nice trousers. And so it kind of really opened up my mind to the whole world of, my God, there's actually, I can buy stuff. I don't have to make everything all the time. Because I think as soon as we really put this pressure on ourselves, especially if our Instagrams are based around what we make, we feel this pressure to constantly not just be making new things, but also to, when I don't know, you have that experience, people know you sew, and they see you, the first thing is, oh, did you make that? And when you say no, you feel like, oh my God, you're letting them down. But this just blew my mind. This just opened up a whole new avenue for me of being, allowing myself to not have to sew everything from scratch anymore. Okay, that was the first thing. In tandem with that, around that time, so when I was in this kind of period of not really working or doing anything productive, my husband would say to me off and on, why don't you think about alterations? Why don't you, do something with sewing, whatever. And I was always like, there's no money in alterations, people will pay for that stuff. It's boring, it's donkey work, it's I had all this impression about what it was like. And around that time when I was discovering charity shopping, I decided, again, tangentially for other reasons, I decided to finally invest in learning pattern cutting. Because in my sewing journey, I kind of gone from, I used to use commercial patterns, and then I got to the point where I was hacking them so much, I thought, well, I just want to learn how to make my own patterns anyway, right? So after tinkering and experimenting, trial and error and all that stuff, and it's a painful process, it takes a long time, right? So I thought, what, let me just invest and actually sign up for a course and learn pattern cutting. So I did that with Morley College. They run 7-8 week courses in pattern cutting and so on, so I did that. And it happens that my tutor there, who I had met years ago when I did a short course at London College of Fashion, and I'm talking 10 years before, I did a 12-week course at London College of Fashion then, and she was my tutor there. And so we kind of we got back in touch, and she had been doing alterations and repairs as a side business because she was teaching full time, but she was doing alteration rehearsal for many, many years. And I was talking to her about it, and halfway through my course, she left teaching to set up her own alteration shop where she lives in Slough in Datchet. And I was really gutted because she was one of these people that I really felt like I wanted to learn more from. You know, and sometimes you get to a certain stage of your learning where it's not that you feel like you can't learn from other people, but you know when you meet somebody that you feel like, oh my God, like I really want to learn from you. Basically, Alex was one of those people for me, by the way. Like tutors that really teach you something, like up level you in a massive way, right? And so she was one of those people for me. So when she left the course, I was absolutely gutted. Anyway, finished it, and then I reached out to her and said, could I come and work with you in your shop, like 1 day a week? You don't have to pay me initially. You know, I just want to learn more from you. And so I went to her shop 1 day a week, and I'd work with her. And the first thing was realizing that it is an actual industry. You know, that it is an actual business doing alterations, and actually it's a growing service. I mean, her shop from day one, I think she'd put out a Facebook post on the local Datchet, whatever, Facebook. And from day one when she opened the doors, it was like steady stream of people, because they were like, oh my God, we're so happy that you're here. Because what were people doing before? You know, like, okay, if it's a standard alteration, if it's a trouser shortening or, you know, jean zip replacement, whatever, you take it to a dry cleaner. But when it's something a bit more specialist, or it requires a fitting, like it's too baggy here, or I want, you know, like a button taken off here, or change a neckline or whatever, it's like, where do you go if you can't sew? And so she just dropped into this village like some kind of like religious figure. And I was like, but it was fascinating, and working with her, because, you know, sewing from scratch and doing alterations, I discovered, are two very different skills. Yes, you need to know how to sew to do alterations, but you also, for alterations, you have to understand fit, you have to understand construction, and you have to build up your library of every single piece of construction, how to sew a cuff, how to do a fly, you know, all these kind of things you have to get to grips to very, very quickly. But the best way to do that, of course, is to deconstruct something, right? Because then when you deconstruct it, you can see and reconstruct it. But anyway, so in the course of me working with her, I had learned so much. And it opened up my eyes now into the whole thing of, not only do I not have to buy, or have to make everything from scratch, I can buy things secondhand, and I can alter them. Oh my God. You know, so now I'm getting to this stage of fully customizing my wardrobe, not with less effort in a way, because sometimes people ask me, like, you know, when I've done an alteration on Instagram, and it was like, literally I've taken this thing back to nothing and then putting it, and like, wouldn't it be easier to make it from scratch? And it's like, arguably yes. But I think what I discovered is that, I think what people don't realize, and I was seeing this in the context of commissions the other day, someone was asking me if I do commissions, and I'm like, well, I tend not to, because what people don't realize is how many micro decisions go into making a garment that you are designing and making yourself. If you're following a pattern, it's a bit simpler because you're following the steps and whatnot. When you decide to make something from scratch yourself, you've got to decide, like, how thick do I want the cuff? How long does it have to be? How far are the buttons from the placket? You know, all these things you have to decide. How long do I want this? Is it curved? Is it straight? Does it have a slit? Does it not have a, you know, all these things. And so when I'm making for myself, I can make all those micro decisions on the spot. But when you're making for clients, you have to ask them. You know, so I found that whole process quite draining, really. But with alterations, it was like, because it's quite straightforward in a way, right? And what I discovered that I liked, because if you'd asked me, like my husband did 3 years before, what alterations, and I literally like just spat him out of the room. It was like, I actually kind of prefer it as a way of making an income than, say, commissions or whatever, because it's pretty straightforward. Like, I know what you want, I can do it without too much creative thought. I mean, yes, there's problem solving involved, but really, we're really just problem solving here, right? And it freed up a lot of my creative space to just keep doing my own, of course, focusing on my own wardrobe, which is where all the joy is. So as I began to share a lot of that on Instagram, and I think the other transition I made on Instagram was moving from static photos to video. I know there was, if many of you on Instagram, I know there was, you know, a few years ago there was all noise about reels, things about reels. But for me, it was about finding a method that really communicated the process over which I was taking something. So I bought something from the charity shop, and I saw a vision for it. I executed that vision, and you can see it kind of step by step how that happened, and then, oh my God, the transformation. You know, and just even making that transition in how I was telling my story, how I was sharing my work, was really how I managed to then grow the audience, right? And it wasn't, again, I don't think, I mean, Alice can probably test this. If you try and grow your Instagram, it's really difficult. It's painful, it's difficult, right? So what you do is you just share the work you love, share what you do, and find a way to communicate it in a way that people can really go on that journey with you. That's all there is to it, you know, and then at some point the algorithm will favor you, because at some point that post will really resonate with people, and Instagram will show it to more and more people, and they will come and follow you, you know. And so that's been my whole kind of journey. I wasn't probably meant to spend that long talking about that, but anyway. But as I began to look at this whole world of starting with an existing garment and turn it into something else, or alter it, or embellish it. I mean, I brought some examples for you, right? And here we're going to have a little trivia, see how many of you follow this. Been watching all my videos. So we'll start with this shirt, right? So Sarah was asking about, like, you know, when I'm sourcing, like, what do I look for, and, you know, like, where does that journey begin, right? So remember when I talked about intentions? What I notice happens a lot is I tend now to try not to go out shopping with no clear vision of what it is I'm looking for. Because then what happens is, inevitably you'll see something you like, right? And you'll be like, oh my God, that's cute. Well, I could do this with that, I could do that with that, and I'll buy it. And then it just like gets shunted to the bottom of the pile, because there's no urgency, there's nothing I really want to wear it for, there's nothing, you know, after the initial excitement of seeing it in the shop and getting this like, oh my God, it could be this. It's like, you then get back home and it's like, well, yeah, it could be.
It's not going to be.
It's not going to be right now. So, you know, I always start with the whole, like, what do I actually want? You know, because I think it's another trap we fall into as sewers, that we get, you know, caught up in projects, and we see someone's made a nice pattern, we thought, oh, that'd be nice, so I'll get myself a pattern, I'll make it. And, you know, it's not that there's no value in that, but then we end up kind of building these wardrobes of pieces that end up kind of just being one-off projects, you know, and it's like we might make something that's like, well, where am I going to wear that? You know, so I kind of start with, I'll usually, because I'll have certain things in mind. I mean, it might be an everyday thing. It's not always big occasions, right? But big occasions are, for me, a nice incentive to actually make special pieces, right? Because. But, you know, it could be everyday things. So you might just realize, okay, well, actually, I could do with a black trouser, or I could do with, you know, from day to day. And so it's not that I'll necessarily go on a massive mission at the time. I mean, if there's a time urgency, obviously I will. But I'll kind of just, in my mind, I'll just think, oh, right, okay, so a black trouser. I could really do with a black trouser. And then when I'm sourcing, it's not like I've got this sort of shopping list, but what I found happens is that I'll see something, I'll be like, oh my God, I did want a black trouser, and now here's a black trouser. That's like the perfect starting point for it. It doesn't happen every trip or everything, but because I've kind of built up in my mind this little, you know, this kind of list of like things I'd like to have, or things I'd like to make, or little projects, when they come, I'll immediately identify, oh my God, this would be perfect for that thing I wanted to wear, or that thing I wanted to make, or that occasion that I have. But for me, it always starts with colour, right? I've spoken before on my Instagram about I had my colours done, you know, like colour analysis. I don't know how much you know about it. How many of you know about that, colour analysis?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had that done a few years ago, like way before surgery and all that stuff. And it was because a friend of mine had hers done, and she's one of these women that always looked amazing, no matter what she wore. And one time I was talking to her, she's like, yeah, I know my colours. I was like, what is this? What is this? So I went to her consultant and had mine done, and it literally, like, again, you know, and you just, it's like when you have your mind open to a whole different way of thinking, right? So that for me really began to sharpen a lot of my choices, even with fabrics. And so when I'm outsourcing now, I will now firstly look at colour, because I don't really bother buying anything that I don't feel will suit me or that will fit in with the rest of my wardrobe. Then obviously it's fabrication, right? I mean, we can't, when you're sewing, you can't get away from the fact that fabric is a massively important part of the garments we sew. Now, I used to be a real snob about, it's the cotton, it has some, all these natural fibres. And of course, when you find something that is 100% cotton these days, it's like finding gold, isn't it? You're like, oh God, it's cotton, I'm going to buy it. Even though it's like, you don't even like it. But, I've become a bit less snobbish about that lately. Because I kind of feel like, well, it's the thought of all of these acrylic and polyester things rotting in the earth also doesn't feel quite right? So I kind of think sometimes I'll go in with a label blindness. These days I kind of think I'm not even going to look at the brand, I'm not even going to look at the labit. If I like it and I feel I can work with it, and it's a starting point for what I want to do, then I'll get it, right? But then it is a starting canvas. It's not a completely blank canvas because it's already a garment. So then it's thinking about like, how is this really going to work for the thing I want to make? And I almost have to see the vision for what it is I want to do with it from the off. Like there are times when I'll see something and I will buy it just for the fabric. But in my experience, what I've found is that it then ends up sitting in that horrific kind of naughty pile in the corner that never gets seen to, because I don't have a clear vision for it, and so it never quite gets to my cutting table. So I think the clearer vision I can have for something, which usually is prompted by an event I'm going to or something I feel like I desperately need in my wardrobe, then that's when I feel the urgency. And then when I see the starting point or garment that could be the starting point for it, it feels a lot more clear because I already know what it is I want out of it. And so it's almost like on the hanger, I can actually see like what I'm going to do with it. And it's then that I will buy it. Now, it's not always a very black and white process, right? I think when it comes to, I tend to stay away from the word upcycling, only because I think it gives people certain connotations. I don't know about you, but when I hear upcycling, I think patchwork. People will have different visions of what they think about this stuff. For me, it's kind of about transformation, right? It's about transforming something from something you wouldn't really wear in its existing state, but you are now turning it into something that you feel excited about wearing. And that for me takes various forms, right? It could be through a simple alteration, it could be through a full transformation, it could be through an embellishment, so like this shirt, it was a very standard shirt. It had like a little burn mark here, it had some stains on the back, and so I got it for £1.50 in one of these kilo sales. But I love the bright and white stripes, and I thought, well, I can just embellish it, jazz it up, right? And that's exactly what I've done. And now it's just, well, it's this, right? So I think it's just about starting off with realizing that even anything could be rescued. And because I love working with trims anyway, I always feel like it's quite a nice way of disguising stains, sewing over things, it's a really great way of mending actually, as another little tool in your armory. But now, so I kind of, as I went on this whole journey then of, thrifting, charity shopping, refashioning, all that stuff, I began to realize that even with, I do treat myself to new fabrics every now and then, but when I think about like the plethora of fabric that is already available through existing garments or even through like bedding, homeware, all of that stuff, there's almost no reason why we ever have to buy new fabric. Of course, there's something wrong with that. But I just, almost as a challenge to myself, I kind of thought actually, I quite like that thrill of finding something, knowing that it's not really that widely available, and actually the good feeling that comes from feeling like you're repurposing something that's just somebody else's trash, right? Somebody else's waste. So, we're going to do a little show and tell. Here's our little trivia quiz. Who knows what this once was? A duvet cover!
IKEA duvet cover, maybe.
Well, I think it's a London Underground duvet cover. So I found this at a charity shop near where my in-laws live in Nottingham. So we go and see them quite often now because they're getting on a bit and obviously take the kids to see them. And there's a big Salvation Army donation centre near where they live, and I always go there when I go and visit. And I didn't see any clothes on that round, but I was going past the linen section, I was just like, I just saw this striped thing on the hat, and I was like, what is this? And yeah, so I made these trousers, right? And I also got a pair of shorts, and I'm about to make myself a shirt as well. And who knows what the waistband is made of?
Curtains.
An offcut of a curtain in a house that we were renting was while we were having our house extended, right? Because this is the whole thing. I don't know if you experience this, but when I'm sewing, you know, you get into this flow. And if you ever have to stop because you don't have the right button or the right zip, it's just like, oh my god, it's so annoying. Which is why I justify having a massive stash of trims and all kinds of stuff, because I almost always will have something I can use. So that was the case with this waistband. I was like, what waistband am I going to put on this? I'm like, I'm not going to use a self waistband because, you know, life's too short for self waistbands, right? And I was like, because I put this binding, I thought it'd be nice to do a bit of a stripe, you know, I've got the binding. I'm like, well, what do I use here? You know, and I was literally looking around the bedroom. I was literally like this, looking around and saw this curtain. I was like, it's miles too long. I was like, oh my God, the curtain. You know, literally like WhatsApp the landlord, like, would you mind? I mean, the curtains would look like they could be shortened a bit. And it was a perfect win-win, because they're like, yeah, we've been meaning to do that. I'm like, oh yeah, no, don't worry about you. There you go, right? So it's amazing what you can do with stuff you have lying around. It really is. Okay, now we're going to move on to this one. Who knows what this was? Or what the original format of this was when I found it?
Like skirt suits.
Well done, Harriet!
Too much a skirt suit.
Yes, it was. It was. Yes, it was.
Big shoulders. And
Yes, a very 80s-tastic skirt power suit. It was a long maxi skirt with this horrendous kind of gold, you know, 80s button. The jacket was like massive shoulders, like the neckline was all up here, right? It was very, very matronly. Now, when I saw this suit in the charity shop, quick backstory. Actually, it was come back to the dressmaker's ball. When I was thinking about my outfit at the dressmaker's ball, initially I thought of making myself a tartan suit. Because when I was doing my pattern cutting course at Morley College, as my final project, I made a tartan suit for a friend of mine. When I made her suit, I was like, I want one of those. So I never got around to the whole like actually getting it done. And when I saw the suit in the turn, I was like, the colour, yes, tick. I love the fact that it was this kind of tweedy thing, and I was like, yes, it's current form, it is not remotely anything I'd want to wear. But we can work here. And as it turned out, I got the whole trouser from the skirt. I had repurposed the waistband from a pair of shorts that I'd made that I never really wore. And I just thought, like, that would be perfect on this. So I unpicked all of that and put it in here. And then with the jacket, so the jacket came a little bit later because obviously the dressmaker's ball came and went, and I did my tartan suit. And then I didn't have an occasion to wear a tartan suit until last year at the Stitch Festival, or whichever festival it was where I was judging the Boys So 2 couple. And I thought, okay, for that, I want to wear my tartan suit. So that incentivized me to then work on the jacket. And that was, it wasn't even cutting a pattern. I kind of just looked at the existing garment. And the break line used to be here, right? Because, I mean, I had to really press this to buggery to try and get it to sit here. But the neckline was up here. So it was quite a high neck, and I really wanted it to be a bit more like a classic kind of blazer lapel. So I kept certain aspects of it. I mean, like the collar I had trimmed down. I mean, I did have to downsize it quite significantly. And there was this process of putting it on, you know, kind of taking my chalk and sort of, you know, outlining things. I mean, I covered all the whole process of my stories. But yeah, and there you go. And then I had a completely reworked suit that I can wear, right? So I wouldn't have never had the confidence to do this had I not spent a year doing alterations professionally, right? And so I think this is where, as if you can upskill yourself, this is another thing that I have really come to learn in my life. You never lose when you invest in upskilling yourself in something, especially something that you are interested in, because skills pay the bills. Right? That is very hashtag.
Did you make the pockets, or were the pockets already there in the jacket?
These pockets were already there, actually. So I didn't, because you never want to mess around with belt pockets. I'll give you that one for free. If you can help it, never mess around with belt pockets. I did have this trim up here, though.
And around the lapels as well. The black trim around
yeah,
the...
even the lining, look, even the lining's the same. I did reline both these, I lined them in silk. Because that's another thing I like to do. Even if the outer fabric of something I buy is a little bit cheap and nasty, I always like to do a nice lining. Because I always think, well, not only does it give me a little touch of luxury, I know no one else is seeing this and appreciating it, but I am. And again, I think this is where a lot of my preconceptions growing up of when you make something it's not as good, you know what I mean? These are just little ways that I find to remind me how elevated my own sewing can be. And also, I also think about like a bit of resale value. Not that I'm planning to sell it, but you know, if like when I cock it and die, my kids ever have to sell it. You know what I mean? I just think like you've paid attention to these things, you know. And actually, one thing I find, especially now with so much fast fashion out there, the whole even charity shopping landscape has changed. Like it's 90% fast fashion, and so it's really difficult to get quality fabrics anymore in a lot of secondhand clothing, which is a shame. But at the same time, I just think even doing things like simply adding a really nice lining can really elevate something that, like I said, can be a little bit cheap and nasty on the outside. Okay, so next up, who knows?
Scarf.
Yes, well done. So, a bit sort of topical, I guess, but a couple of years ago, I think when I was making this dress, I decided I wanted to make it out of some scarves. And I went onto Etsy and I started looking, and I came across these, they're called keffiyeh scarves. They're worn by men in the Middle East. And these particular scarves were made by the last surviving factory in Palestine at the time that was making these kind of scarves. And I bought some. I bought in red, in green, and a multicolored one. And I made a couple of dresses, including this one. God knows if that factory is still there now. But anyway, so for me, this dress now has particular significance, actually. And yeah, but it's such a simple design. This panel here is literally a rectangle that I scooped out the back neck, and then I mean, this is even a straight line. If you look at the green, even these are straight lines. But the way I made it curve was by pleating it up here. And then the rest of it is literally rectangles. That's a rectangle. That's a rectangle. Front and back are rectangles. It is, nearly, apart from a few little offcuts, right? So, you know, I kind of realized that we don't actually have to get overly complicated with the construction of things, right? I mean, and okay, I do tend to gravitate towards quite loose-fitting things, so I get away with these kind of shapeless things, right? Because that's just what I like. But this was really just to show you how simply you can make things with very simple shapes and just adding a few little embellishing touches, right? So this is a trim that I got actually on Gold Hog Road. Okay, here's another thing for free. If you're in the market for trims, there's Tony's Textiles across the way. I love Tony's Textiles. I have probably, like, I don't know, bought him a second home. And it's not the cheapest, but his trims are amazing. And he does very nice embellished sequin fabrics and things like that as well upstairs. So, yeah, I would highly recommend the trip to do. And yeah, and so, you know, even like adding in this little fringing here, you know, like you can just get creative. And okay, because trims are my weakness, I do have a ridiculously massive stash of it. So whenever I am in the throes of creating or making or something, I will often have like things laid out, and I'll just lay them out and say, okay, well, how does this one look here? How does that one look there? And you know, that process is sometimes a little bit time consuming, and you can sometimes get yourself into a bit of a like, oh my god, I can't even see anymore, like you're just trying so many different things. But I think this is where, you know, the more I've kind of gotten to, I guess, know myself and embrace myself. And I think this is one upside actually of having gone through that whole existential crisis, because when you start to peel everything away that you thought was you, and now you realize, okay, so I have to now rebuild and get to know myself on a much deeper level. You know, I think this is where, like, I don't know that I would have had the confidence to wear this like 10 years ago. Maybe, I don't know, it's hard to say, but I'm not sure I would. You know, and I feel like I'm kind of, as I'm getting older, I mean, I'm in my late 40s now, and as I get older, I feel like I'm actually, I mean, my husband's like, just dreads it because he's like, you're going to enter your statement everything era now. It's like, you know, getting more and more elaborate every year that goes. But I think some of that comes with just embracing what you feel drawn to and not apologizing for it, right? And actually, so you probably all see on Instagram that Iris Arpel passed away.
Oh no, did she?
Yeah.
Just the other day.
Yeah, well, the 1st of March, which is what, yesterday?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So of course there's been all these tributes and everything, but one of the best quotes I read from someone today, from her, was the biggest fashion faux pas is looking in the mirror and not seeing yourself. And I think that was really like, oh my God, that's so true, you know? And so I think this is where, for me, this is where the Holy Grail is within the sewing, right? It's about getting to a stage more and more where instead of being led by the trends or being led by, you know, seeing a nice pattern on somebody and it looks nice on them, it's really getting to, like, you know, it's all well and nice to get inspiration externally, you know, I do that too, but it's then doing that closer examination of, is it really me or am I just being influenced, you know, or really getting to look at even your own wardrobe, the things that you pull out all the time, that when you wear those things, you feel like, I am 100% me in this, and just going with that, owning it, and being true to that, and expanding it, right? You don't ever have to stay the same. You know, we're always evolving and expanding, and, you know, and as we should. This is the nature of life, is to expand, right? So, right, who knows what this was? It's probably a very easy guess.
It's not. It's amazing. I know it because I saw it on your Instagram. It's a printed piece.
So, it was bought. I found this in a recently opened kind of vintage curiosities shop near me. And it looked like it was a tablecloth. But upon examination, when I was talking to the shop owner, she said she thought it was 2 pillowcases that had been sewn together into a tablecloth. But I loved the pattern. Oh, and these were, some sort of linen placemats or something like that. And it was around the time when I had wanted to make myself a robe, because I'd seen this woman on Instagram. How many of you follow Erica Davies? Yeah. So she wore this robe, you know, with the evil eye thing, whatever. Oh my God, she broke the internet with that robe. Anyway, I was on this people that I was like, oh my God, I feel my robe era coming on. And so again, just farted away. And then when I was in that shop, and, you know, it was a new shop, I thought, oh, what's in here? And then I saw it, I was like, oh, my robe. It's meant to be my robe. And so that's how things come about for me, usually. You know, so had I seen this without having robe in my sort of subconsciousness, I may have still bought it, but I seriously doubt I would have sewn anything with it now, because I think it would have just been this nice thing I bought with no idea what I was going to do with it. But because I knew I wanted to make myself a robe, it was like, and I saw this, I was like, oh my God, it's perfect. So, you know, I think this is why I say it really starts off with getting a little bit more intentional in your mind about what it is you need clothes-wise, what it is you want, what it is that makes you feel good. Recognizing that we have so many options for how that comes about. You know, we don't always have to keep ourselves pigeonholed into, well, I've got to make it from scratch because it's so virtuous. It's like, you don't have to. There's no shoulds in life, as I keep saying to my kids. There's no shoulds in life. So if there's resources there, if there are things already made, let's just use them. You know, and I think it's really just about allowing your vision, your creativity, and everything to be open. You know, I think this is really what it comes down to. You know, it's about staying open to possibilities. So that's it. That's my TED Talk. Oh, well, I wasn't going to because it was like, do you make this? I was waiting for it. Oh, wait. Well, You'll even get a modeled view of this one. Okay, so again, this is another story about intention, right? So you know how the ether, the internet reads your mind. So because we've got a dog, right? So I'm always out dog walking mornings, whatever. And in the winter, it's really just drudgy and horrible, right? You're going out to the driving rain half the time, mud pit of parks and things. And I didn't really have a raincoat that I felt me in. And I had looked over the years, but oh my God, rainwear is just so dull. Like, so dull. So I had put out, I was just like, okay, I want to find some rainwear, but I want to find something that's just vibrant and nice and like not cut off here, because rain doesn't stop here. Rain goes all the way down. And then I must have searched, right? I think I'm probably like search whatever, rainwear. And then I started getting served up all these ads on Instagram for funky rainwear. And Sitting Suits came up. And I looked at their stuff and I was like, love the designs, okay. And then I read their story and I was like, love the story. So I reached out to them and I said, hi, this stuff's amazing, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, like, would you like to collaborate with me? Which is Instagram speak for, would you like to give me one? And I can wax lyrical about it because it's amazing. And they were like, yeah. So I was like, oh my God, really? Yes, please. So I chose this one, again, colors, but also just, you know, I just loved it. So they sent it to me, and I just like, it arrived, I ripped it open, I was like, put it on, I was just like, oh my God, it was like trailing halfway on the floor. And it's a Scandinavian company, and it was a Danish, and so it's a one size.
Okay.
So one size Scandi, which is... So I was like, oh my God, like, I'm going to have to alter this. Like, there's no way, I just look ridiculous. And this would be traipsing all over in the mud. So, again, I think it's only because I've had now the experience of doing alterations professionally. It's just these things, they don't faze me as much. Had I tried to tackle this like 5 years ago, I probably would have made a massive pig's ear of it. But now I'm like, well, and you get these little wings, right? So looking at the hem, because, you know, it's lined, right? It's 2 layers. And obviously when you're dealing with the lining, sometimes it can be a really involved alteration, right? If it's a blazer or a coat or something like that, because you got it, you know. This, I was like, oh my God, you just have to unpick that. It's all like the lining's one enclosing. It's a double turn, it's a double turn. It's not that hard. But there was other things like, you know, so it just had a black zip going up the middle. And it was a one-sided zip. So there are times when you just think like, you know, because you're quite constricted in there, you know, and I know it's oversized. But then I kind of thought it'd be nice to just do the top one and not have to, you know, have the whole thing zipped up at the bottom. So I thought, well, okay, you know me and zips anyway. I think I had some sort of horrific traumatic zip incident in the past because I really don't like zips. And so I kind of thought, well, actually, and you know, these little pops of gold is a bit of a thing for me. You know what I mean? Again, whenever I'm working on something or I see something, I always think to myself, like, how can I elevate this? Right? When I worked in the city, I worked first for American Express, and then I worked for various other little financial services companies. And when you work in the city, right, you work for either a big financial company or even the smaller ones, you are very conscious of the fact that there is an organizational hierarchy. Especially in a company like Amex, because you're literally in a grade, or you're a 35, you're a 45, or you're a 55. You know, and so there's this thing, there's what they call a corporate ladder, because you are getting the next promotion, the next grade, the next whatever, right? And what happens is, so this is my life in my 20s, right? And I was at that time, I mean, I started off on a low, I started off as an admin assistant, like basically someone's PA. And then I sort of, you know, worked my way up, right? What you become very conscious of is the fact that there are people around the office that make a hell of a lot more money than you. As much as you might be, you know, I was making more than a lot of my friends, but at work, I was like, I'm making nothing near what you're making, because you got the nice handbag, and you got the, you know, all that stuff, and you got all the trappings of looking like you make money, and I can barely afford a suit that doesn't look like it's from H&M, you know what I mean? Like, so, working in that world, it was weird for me, because it was like, well, I couldn't wear what I wanted. I mean, I could, but I wasn't taken that seriously, you know what I mean? So my corporate wardrobe was just, I mean, I was known for being a relatively flamboyant dresser, especially in my last job. But it was still where I never quite felt like I found my corporate identity. And I think it was because I didn't want the corporate identity. I didn't want to conform to all that. Although, funnily enough, had I sewn then, and had I made something like this, or had I been able to make something like this, that would have been, I would quite happily rock a two-piece suit, but not in grey or navy pinstripe. It would be in like a tartan or something like this. But anyway, so I'm very conscious of the fact that loads of people money around. And around then, for some reason, I guess because of that sort of hierarchy that you live in day in, day out, for a while I was quite, not obsessed, but I would get this thing of like, when I get on the train, I want to look like I'm making money. I want to look like somebody who, you know, I don't look like some dirt poor kind of, you know what I mean? I want to look like, actually, I'm going to work, thank you very much, and you know, I'm someone worth paying attention to. But you know what I mean? Just, you feel this need to kind of feel some kind of status. And it's not even from a kind of like, I want to be better than everybody else, but I think it's, you know, as humans, it's a basic, one of Maslow's basic needs of hierarchies, right? Every human has a need to feel significant, right? We all have it. And I think that for me was just my need for significance, feeling like that's how I wanted to express itself at that point. Because I didn't feel like I had significance in many other ways, right? I didn't feel like I can stand up with my clothes or anything like that. So, you know, I wanted to have the expensive bag and the expensive shoe because that was my way of going, yeah, you know. But I think now I don't hold on to any of those trappings anymore. Like I don't care about labels, honestly. I'm not, look, I mean, my footwear, I'm sorry. Yeah. There's no better example of how little I care now about accessories and shoes and what I'm wearing right now. But I think in my sewing, I still have this thing of, I want the thing I'm wearing to still look elevated, even if it is a piece from H&M, even if it is from that Chinese company we don't speak of. You know, like, I still want it to look elevated because, again, that's how I want to feel inside. And it reflects where the energy I want to put out into the world. Which, you know, it's not about being better than anybody else, but it's the fact that we should all feel elevated in our lives because we're all special, we're all here for a reason, right? So those little pops of gold are a thing for me because I just think they just add that in a way that silver could never. I know, like silver's meant to be my colour, and it's alright, like my hair's already silver, I've got that. But I'm like, yeah, silver could never. So little pops of gold. Even like the trims, the pipings, you know, which is why I add these little things, because it's just a little bit of elevation, and it is a fine line, right? I mean, you know, sometimes we kind of go a little bit into costume territory, but I think that is where it's about knowing where your boundaries are with all these things, you know, how far you feel you can push yourself creatively, dress-wise, whatever, you know, and my thing this year actually is about pushing my boundaries even further a little bit. So one of the next collections I'm about to kick off, one of the next series of projects, is reworking some carnival costumes that I inherited from this woman who's rescuing them from Rio Carnival. She rescues tons of single-wear Samba school costumes from Rio Carnival. And it just so happened that she's moved now to Norwich, but when she reached out to me and we were kind of getting in touch, I discovered that she lives 5 minutes drive from me, like literally. And so I went and she just had all these boxes of costumes and I was like,
Heaven
oh
has
my
come to your
God.
doorstep.
You know, so I had to ring myself because I was just like, but anyway, so I've got this whole heap of costumes out in my studio, which I really want to get cracking with because my challenge here is that the materials are, I mean, you talk about cheap and nasty. They are cheap and nasty. It is that spandex, you know what I mean? Like, so my challenge here really is how am I going to elevate this? But it's a challenge I'm looking forward to because I think it's, yeah, they're going to be mental. But this is where I kind of think, well, this is where I'm going to also push myself in terms of what I feel I can pull off, what I feel I can wear. And you know, it's not for every day, right? I mean, so I think sometimes people think, oh, you just like this every day. I'm like, no, I really don't. Like, you know, this is how I dress for a mending meetup. You know, but it really is not how I dress every day. And I think, you know, it's And some people can. You know, I follow this woman on Instagram who she does upcycling. Anybody know her? Diana Rikasari? She's Indonesian. She does the most incredible. I mean, she's very kitsch, but she's like just so fiercely creative. But yeah, she's one of those people that will just wear the most outlandish thing to go grocery shopping. She thinks nothing of it. Like it's her, it's her outfit. And I just think, wow, hats off. Like, I'd love to get to that stage, but not there yet. Not there yet. Baby steps. But yes, anyway, so that's the sitting suit.
Wonderful. It's fabulous. Thank you so much, Nichole. That was fascinating. I feel very well. I'm sure we all feel very inspired. Yeah, and excited to
Race you to the charity shop.
Yeah,
What's the carnival bit if anybody wants carnival costumes?
yes.